to conferences all the time is the main driver for progress in your skill set and also your relationship, and basically any professional can become a better professional by attending conferences.
It's not the standard, okay? It's a movie theater, but the visual is great and the sound is great, and I've seen a lot of room and space, and I think it's organized well.
Seeing all the people here today and they're excited about stuff, and you can see the energy and the desire to learn and do new things.
And I was positively surprised about the depth, the technical depth of the sessions, and how that makes the tester part of the team.
I think developers do benefit from coming to QA conferences, just the same as testers can benefit from going to dev conferences. You've got to have a broad understanding of what's going on.
It's really inclusive. I would say it's super diverse. People are really, really open and friendly, and it's really organized.
Conferences are well worthwhile just for the ideas that they spark in people. When people come back to the office, they're full of ideas and they're all energized up.
Hi everybody, my name is Tracy. I'm a test pathfinder, which basically means I traipse through the testing jungle to figure out where we're going, where we are right now, and how do we get there. As a part of that, I'd like to talk to you about what kind of value we present as testers, beyond just catching bugs or finding defects. I want to talk about what opportunities we can show, what innovations we can create. So I invite you all to come join me as we hunt for what is beyond the bugs. Hi everybody, welcome to TestCon 2020. My name is Tracy. I'm a test pathfinder from the Netherlands, and I'm honored to open up for you today at this conference. It's a rather strange situation, to be honest, giving a presentation to an entire conference from my home office with my kids sleeping down the hall, but as a tester, I guess I have to be ready for anything. So today you're going to hear from a lot of different test professionals, and they're going to teach you techniques and tips and methodologies that you can take home with you, and you can work with them to mutate cucumbers and control and automate chaos and all these wonderful titles, and eventually you will become those quality titans you're going to hear about at the end. But before we dive all into that, I want to take you on a bit of a different tack. I want to talk about the value inherent in being a tester and in providing testing for an organization. In essence, I want to bring you to a future where you're not just known as the person who finds the bugs. So before I dive into that though, I kind of want to share a story, indulge me a little bit about something that I've learned in the last year. So I recently became a father of twin boys, and yes, I am starting all of my conference talks talking about my boys like a stereotypical parent because I'm a huge fan. Anyway, I've been watching my boys for about a year now as they've grown, and I've come to realize a few things. First of all, they have the curiosity and the explorative spirit that I think any tester would be jealous of. But in addition to that, they've been teaching me that everything that I use and everything that I think about is absolutely wrong. Let me give you some examples. A tea coaster is not for putting drinks on. A tea coaster is for chewing. Apparently, very good for chewing. An apple is not something that you eat. No, again, you chew on the tea coasters, not the apple. The apple you roll across the floor until it smashes against the wall and Dad has to go clean it up. A toy isn't interesting. Now, the container of the toy, that's the interesting part. And unfortunately, the bathtub, which I consider a place to get clean, my boys consider it to have a different use, a rather unfortunate use. But it's one they seem to think has a lot of value. See, it appears to me that they have an entirely different idea of what value an item, process, or sensation has than I do. Whereas I was sure that the most important part of a spoon was the head, they've convinced me now that the underside of the spoon is what should really go in your mouth. And in these times of COVID, they're doing a great job at designing masks. Now, my boys understand that just because something has been useful in one way or another doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only way that it can be used or the only way it can provide value. for some of the things, they understand that as good an item is at doing that thing, it sometimes shouldn't be used for that, or sometimes it should be used for a slightly different item in a different way. They grasp clearly that even though they see me use an item in a certain way, that doesn't mean they're limited to use it only in that way. And the funny thing is, I started asking myself, when did I forget about that? When did I start thinking I could only use an item in a certain way, or I could only see value in an item in a certain way? Okay, so now that I've introduced you to my boys, I've introduced you to myself. My name is Tracy. I'm a test pathfinder and test enthusiast. Basically what that means is that I love testing, agile coaching, exploring everything in the world of testing. But I approach it with a little bit more of a humanistic aspect than a technical aspect most of the time. And I think this has to do with my background as a psychologist. I started my career out as one, and while the career didn't stick, the lesson, the primary attribute of what I was doing as a psychologist has remained the same. And it is the same thing I think of the value when it comes to testing that we have, and that is that we help people grow. We help people grow, we help people learn, and we're aware of the world around us, and we want them to be aware of the world around them. And it's out of that perspective that I'm here to talk to you today about the future of our talent and our industry as testers. To start off with, I hope that testers see their role as valuable. If you don't, please text me after the talk and then I can give you a bit of an ego boost, I hope. Clearly that's something that's important. So I believe that we make a difference to a great many people. And as a tester, I want to know if other people think that as well. So I asked a bunch of testers, what do you perceive to be the role and the value of testing? And these were some of the answers. They told me, we find bugs. Hey, funny that. We focus on how something is made more than whether it's made at all. We look at the entire scope far more often than other disciplines, is what they say. We look at the risks and we provide test reports. But I also heard some more negative things, and that was that we don't solve any bugs. The roles aren't really respected. The testing role is not respected. We're seen as extra members of a team that could just be added or taken off at any point without harming the team. There's no time or budget for us to test well most of the time. And above all, managers just seem to want testers to automate. But sometimes the most common phrase that I heard was, nobody reads the test reports. So that shocked me, honestly, but not because I hadn't had these impressions myself, but because of how prevalent those negative impressions were within the testing community itself. So I started thinking, well, if this is how we see ourselves, how do non-testers see us? So I asked non-testers to explain what it is that we did, describe testing, describe what it is that we provide. And well, they mostly think we did a good job, but many couldn't really place what it was we actually did. They said that we find bugs. Hey, amazing. They said we check other people's work, that is mainly what we do. That we ensure quality, we make sure that it's going to be quality. And not just that, but we improve quality, which incidentally is something that I could argue. We police development standards. We make sure they're doing it the right way. And we automate tests because, that's what we're good for. And we add work at the end of development. It is not that we are anywhere in development, but just at the very end, that's where we do the work. And then we decide whether we can go live with an item or not. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never been given the explicit permission to decide for the entire team whether we can go live with an item or not. Sometimes I wish I had, sometimes I wish I hadn't. And we're often told that we don't build anything. We just check what everyone else has built. Now, I don't really agree with even half that list because it's missing so much. But I do understand that people come up with these answers because we have to ask them what value do you create and how is it that we share this and show this to non-testers. But how is it that this comes off? I mean, if this is the value that comes off, it's not very valuable to me. I would not look at this list and say, yeah, we definitely need testers to do all these things. So I decided to ask managers because they're the ones who hire us, and I wanted to know why. Why did they hire us? What is it about what we do that gives them a feeling of, hey, this is valuable and this is why I should pay money for them. So, of course, I went and I asked a bunch. And I asked them, what's your motivation to hire a tester? And honestly, their answers gave me motivation to make this presentation, because their feedback was not exactly encouraging. Here's what they replied. First and foremost of all their answers, I bet you won't guess what it is. That's right, we find bugs. That's apparently all we do. We think so, non-testers think so, managers think so. We also send test reports about those bugs. We give the go-ahead for the team to send items to production. Once again, first time I'm hearing that I have that power. Great to know. But we also cost a lot of money. And we're a net cost center. We don't create value, we just cost a lot of money. We don't have a clear value independent of the work that developers do. Basically, developers use us to help their work better, and that's it. And we have an unclear return on investment. They're not really sure what they're getting out of us. Now, the number 2 item, number 1, of course, is find bugs. The number 2 item that I heard the most often from managers of organizations was, I don't really know what testers are doing. That's not great, but it is understandable. While a lot of testers can relate what they do on a day-to-day basis, they can say, oh, I've done this test and that test and this activity. Few of them are able to formulate, at least to me, few of them are able to formulate how what they did directly affected business value, how what they did directly created value, how what they did diverted resources in a positive way rather than just took it from development. So it's always seen as modifying the work of others and, of course, finding things that others have done wrong. But I think there's more to testing than that. I think there's a lot more to testing than that. And to illustrate that point, let's first take a look at our landscape. Where do we test in? What is it that we're testing? Well, in my opinion, every single test requires a process. We're looking at a process, we're testing that process. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, it doesn't matter what product you have, you're testing a process that affects that product. Or to put it more succinctly, a process is an item combined with an action that leads to a result. Now, these bold words in here are all items that I believe that we can test. But for example, explaining this phrase, well, if you work for a bank, then you're probably testing the transfer of funds from one place to the next and examining the results, right? If you work for a retail client, then also you're looking at the transfer, in this case the purchase of an item, and the results of the customer, whether they're happy or whether they return it or whether they shop again or something like that. If you work for a regulatory company, what you're looking at is you're looking at the standards and whether a process that is occurring in the way that it's supposed to. So on and on and on, these kind of things. So everything we do as testers isn't just looking at the result, not just looking at that last point there, but we're also looking at the action and the item as well, which, breaking down those pieces, gives us quite a lot to work with. For example, when we add value to a testing process, we look at an item, right? In the item section, testers add value by exploring it. It's what we do. We explore, we look, we examine. And then we use that knowledge to shape our tests and to inform the team about the product. These are 2 distinct values, by the way. Just because we're able to make a test doesn't necessarily mean we've informed the team, and vice versa. Just because we've informed the team doesn't mean we can prove it. So these are all things to keep in mind for the item. Testers also can contribute to the design work in development. And this is something that doesn't happen enough, in my opinion. This is why we're seeing this coming at the end, because we don't tell our opinion about something before it's created. We'll talk more about that in just a little bit. But once you actually know a lot about that item, then you start looking at the action that's done to it. You understand how it moves inside the system, whether it's impacted, upgraded, filtered, whatever it is, you understand more about that action. And for that, you have to examine the system itself. How does that system have an impact? How is that system impacted? And how does it work with the whole organization? If one system changes, is that it? Is it self-contained, or is this something that's going to spread out to multiple domains, multiple teams that you're really going to have to think about? You keep expanding this scope. In the end, you have to say something about that total result. And that total result isn't just this changed and this product moved here. We also say, by moving here, this product did an action on the system, and this was the result. And by the system being changed, another process, this was the result. So in essence, testing isn't limited to that end of development phase. In fact, just based on the item, action, and result that we can examine, testing is practically limitless in scope. So it's kind of hard to figure out where to begin when we talk about value then. Well, let's structure our discussion a little bit. And the way we do that is using 3 different types of arguments. If you're going to make the case to anybody in your organization about why testing has value and where it has value, you need to be able to hit each of these 3 types of arguments. The first one is conceptual. Can you explain the idea? Does it make logical sense? Does it make sense in context? Can I understand it? Is there a good basis for this? Is it proven to actually work this way? Have we ever seen it anywhere else? Does it fit in with the goals of the organization? Does the concept make sense? If the concept doesn't make sense, then you can show a lot of pretty pictures and a lot of pretty images, but again, you're not going to convince somebody to actually do it because they're not excited about it. They don't really want to do it. But let's say they want to do it, they like the concept, and they're convinced, yes, this is going to work, or this is something I'd like to try. How are they going to do it? We have to make the practical argument. Can you use this? Can somebody else use it? What impact does it have when it's there and when it isn't? Who is helped by it? Who is hindered by it? What are some systemic results of doing this, and what would be the results of not doing this? What measurable impact does any of these tests have? Does any of this have on the system? That's the practical argument. And we need to be able to state that quite clearly. What is the actions? A leads to B, leads to C, etc. And lastly, and I know this is the one that you'll get hooked up on, but monetary. We need to be able to argue the money. We need to be able to talk about money as we talk about value. What does it cost? Does it have any return on investment? Will I have to pay money up front? Can this create value in terms of wealth or just conceptually in terms of the process and the practice? Don't misunderstand. This is not just an argument for managers. If I went to a training and when I left that training, I felt that everything I learned at that training that I spend money on produced nothing of monetary value for me, I'd be pretty upset. We do think in monetary terms, but we don't always call it money. And I think it's important that we make that more than just a management argument. That said, it's also a very good management argument, so keep that in mind as we go through. With all these things stated, I'm going to go through a couple of value creation systems from testers. I'm going to take you through a scenario and show you in different areas where we can create value. I want to look at the concept of the actions that we take at testers, the impact of those actions on the people around us, and of course, how much it costs, how much it saves, and how much it produces. So let's take a classic case study of a software development process. We're going to make a few assumptions. The first assumption that we have is that anything we make is going to have issues. Anything that's created is going to have aberrations, things that are not specific to the goal that we had in mind. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad and it's going to break and it's going to cost a lot of money, but they are issues. And a lot of times these issues will be reported by clients as bugs. We're going to make a second assumption that has to do with the team. The team is going to consist out of 3 developers and 1 eventual tester. Granted, most teams also have business analysts and support analysts, and those are very important, but for this scenario, we're going to keep it simple. And we're going to talk about 4 phases of cost of quality. And the first phase is that when we design something, if we fix something in design phase, it costs us €1. If we fix something in a development phase, it costs us €10. If we fix something after the development phase, but before it goes live, that's €100. And if we fix something after a customer spots it, complains about it, and our reputation goes down the toilet, it's going to cost us €1,000 in addition to our reputation. Now, this is a pretty common way of understanding where the costs come in when we're talking about software development, but we're also going to use this for software testing. When we test and do cost of quality, if we find bugs in these areas, that's how much it costs to solve the bugs. 1 bug in 1 is 1, 1 bug in 10 is 10, 1 bug in 100, 100, you get it. Now, classically, the concept is a product is made, it has some issues, there's no investment in testing. In this scenario, we're not doing any testing, but that doesn't mean that bugs aren't found. See, developers, they know what they're doing most of the time. We got to be nice to our developer friends, they do know what they're doing. They run some unit tests, and they find and fix 250 of that 1,000 bugs that are created. The users still encounter 750 bugs, and this is our chart that we get. Monetarily, we have 0 personnel costs. We have 0 infrastructure costs, 0 investments in total for testing. None. Development costs for debugging, we found 250 bugs. That's 250 times 10. 2,500 euros it was what it cost us of the developer's time to fix those 250 bugs. And unfortunately that's it, because the rest goes to the users, and they find 750 bugs, and that's times 1,000, so that's 750,000, or more to the point, 3/4 of $1 million, €1,000,000. That's a lot of cost of quality. That means we're losing a lot of money, because a product will always have issues, and we're going to lose money because it has issues. We also have angry customers, because when you put out a product and it has 750 bugs, they're not happy. I mean, they might pretend that that's the way it's supposed to be, and yeah, it's built as designed, but no, they're not going to be really happy. They're going to be angry customers, and that's not ideal. So let's add testing, but more specifically, let's add the bare minimum of testing. I'm talking manual, functional testing. Does it go there? Yes, no, done. Just with this kind of testing alone, just with manual functional testing, we fund it, we apply it, and we find some bugs. At least that's the hope. In practice, developers create the product. They fix their 250 bugs. The testers find 350 additional bugs, and they fix those along with development. And the users encounter 400 bugs rather than the 750 they did before. But this all costs some money, doesn't it? Because we have personnel costs. 5,000 euros for the tester, 10,000 for the infrastructure that the tester needs to do their testing, a good test environment, test data, that sort of thing. So we're looking at an investment for just this version of 15,000. That's upfront costs. That's what managers are talking about when they say, what's it going to cost? Well, it's going to cost you 15,000. What do we have in the debugging? Well, the developers are still doing their thing. They're still finding 250 bugs. It still costs us 2,500. And then testers come in and they find some bugs. And that's 350 bugs that they find, which is 35,000. Wow, okay, now we're getting quite a lot of costs here. Yikes. We've suddenly got 35,000 and 2,500 and 15,000. That's a lot of money up front. However, take a look at the users. The users have now found 400 bugs, and that costs us 400,000 euros, which is a bit less than the 3/4 of $1 million that we were paying before. In fact, it's about 39% less in total. Even though we had to invest a bunch up front, and even though we have to pay for the testers to do their thing, we've saved 39%, or more clearly, 300,000 euros. Just by adding manual functional testing. All right, we've cut nearly a third off, actually more than a third, off of the amount of money that it used to cost to get good quality. That's also 40% less defects on the customer side. That means they're happier. We have more money. Let's throw a party, we've got the money. But that's not all we can do. Because just doing manual functional testing is great. You can show this to your manager and say, this is why you shouldn't fire me, but I think we can add more value. And we can add value in a way that they want us to add value with automation. So, we do automated verifications. The product is made, it has issues still, we do manual functional testing, the developers find their bugs, but we also add automation. How do we do that? Well, most of the time we buy a tool, or sometimes we build a tool. And this tool helps us to take standard and repeated tests that we do all the time, that we always find a bug with, or at least mostly always find a bug with, and we put that up there. And it becomes our verification automation. In practice, developers create a product, They fixed 250 bugs. However, we had to buy some tooling for this next step. And tools aren't cheap. Tools are very, very much not cheap. And they require time and investment, not just from the testers and developers, but also from support. So it's a big upfront cost. A lot of times that's almost over 100, maybe 150,000 upfront costs for the tool, the license, and all this. But in order to make this a little bit more realistic, we're going to amortize that. We're going to say, spread out over the 3 years that the license is valid, it's going to cost us per month $12,500. That's the investment in the tool. Quite a lot of investment up front again, because we're almost doubling the investment that we did just for testers, but trust me, it's going to be worth it. Because automation has also been shown to find about 40% of any of the remaining defects, because a lot of the tests that we do right now, we do over and over and over again, because they're things that are constantly coming up. And that's not to say that they're built wrong, it's just how the system works. We just know that these things are going to come up. So it finds 40% of those remaining bugs, which means 200 bugs, which means 500 of the defects are going to be found in testing in total. Automation finds 300, testers find 200, we move on. The users now only find 250 bugs. Now all of this still has a cost, right? Because now we're doing more bugs that we find with testing in the after development phase. Because again, this is all testing that we do after development. That's 50,000 there, 2,500 for the cost of debugging, and 27,500 just invested in testing. This is what makes managers panic. But we can help you with that, because monetarily you've reduced the cost to 56%, or 422,000 euros. Because again, we're investing in it, but we're also getting a lot out of it by pulling the bugs out of production, by pulling them away from the users, lowering that impact and increasing trust. Not only that, but we have those less defects for the customers. It's 66% less now. And that means that our return on investment, including all the investment we made for the tool, is a whopping 1,536%. That's huge. That's the kind of return on investment that gets you sold on a business plan. Show that amount that you save almost €500,000 and that you have a return on investment of 1,536%. I think we're going to be happy. Are we done here? No, because just because we've tested and we've done automated verifications doesn't mean that this is where the value for testing ends. And we can show that we've prevented some cost reductions, sure. But we need to figure out where else we can do testing, because this impression that we just do it at the end is just wrong. So what we're going to do is we're going to do what's called shifting left, and we're going to do some design and requirement testing. The concept, again, fairly simple. Design is tested, the product would be made, but what we do first is we test the design, we test the requirements, we test the change request even, and we improve that. We improve it to the point where we've refined the idea, we've refined how we're going to build it, and so that when the product is made, it's made with fewer issues. Now it doesn't start with 1,000, no. Now it starts with a lot less. And we still do manual functional testing and automated verification. We fund that, we apply it just like we did before. The only thing we're adding here is we're now doing some design testing. In practice, that means that testers inspect the design and requirements and find a lot of potential static defects. And those, we can say about 150 of those. We find 150 things that just because the request was badly worded, or because we didn't really understand, or there was a little translation error, we've managed to fix it before it's even begun. That's €1 per bug. As you can imagine, this is going to be a drastic shift. So €1 per bug, we find 150 of those bugs. Developers still do their normal thing. They fix 250 bugs. Again, a lot of those from unit tests. They fix those. But testers, we're going to find a few less bugs with our manual testing simply because we ran out of time. We're doing design testing, and it was just one tester. So I got to do a lot of different things. I'm going to find a few less bugs in our after development phase. But considering the spread, we now have 150 at the beginning, 2,500 development, 47,500, which is less than what we paid before, in our after development phase, and 125 bugs on the customer side. Monetarily, this leads to a cost reduction of 73%. we're now almost 3/4 less in the hole from what we would have had to pay for the same product with the same number of bugs just by shifting where we do our work and by investing a little bit. It also means 83% less defects on the customer side. Now they're just dealing with 125 bugs rather than the 750 they were before. That's huge. They're going to be a lot happier with us. And it also means that we have a return on investment of almost 2,000%. We've invested in testing, we've invested in training our testers, we've invested in doing the design testing, and now we've saved 549,000 euros. I mean, what more can we do? Well, I'll tell you. We can help support. We can go DevOps. We can do informative testing. Now, again, conceptually, development occurs as it does before. We know there's going to be known and accepted issues for operations, but we can tell them about it before they have to deal with it from a customer. So let's say at the end of the process, we still know there's going to be 125 bugs. And actually scratch that, let's go further than that. Let's say instead of just those 125 bugs that escape us, let's say we have an additional 1,000 bugs that we know would possibly come up. They're not in there, but they could possibly be in there because we know about the product. So we've told support about this. We've told support this might be a risk if something changes, and now they've either added it to the instruction manual for the client or they have it ready at their own department. And whatever it means, what happens with them is that support can now get their answers quicker. They know the information, they have access to the information, or they just have access to us. Either way, it works. What it does is it reduces the amount of time that they have to do with each call for each support issue by about 15 minutes. If you take about an hour call, it reduces it by about a fourth. Now, typically, we can assume that a support person gets about 5 calls a month for a particular issue for the first year that it's live, because if that bug is there, it's going to keep coming back even if we try to patch it and fix it. Let's just assume we get about 5 calls a month. That's 5 calls a month where we're saving 15 minutes each. Let's take an hourly salary, yada, yada, yada. We're basically talking about saving 50 euros per issue. And how many issues was that? Well, if we assume about half of that 1,000, we say 500 accepted issues exist for every 1,000 unaccepted issues. Do the multiplication, do the math, and you save about 25,000 euros for your support colleagues. Now again, this is not saving it directly in our cost of quality, but in the overall cost of quality, because we didn't even count support before. But now we've saved 25,000 in support costs, which again comes off of that user area. So while originally we were paying 125,000, now we're just paying 100,000 for them. Well, what does that mean? Well, we've now saved 574,000 euros, which means we have a cost reduction of 76%. And we've got, again, 83% less defects. We didn't really change any of that. And we've got a return on investment over 2,000%. And we've got happy organizations. We're working better together. The parties that we were throwing at the beginning are now even bigger because now support can join in and have fun with us instead of just saying, oh, God, why do they keep building such terrible things? We're working together. Let's do more of that. I'm surprised, honestly, that risk doesn't come up more when we talk about testing because it's in almost every manual, it's in almost every training, and yet when I ask people what do we do, nobody said that we cover risk. Nobody said that we insure any quality for risks. They just say, oh yeah, we make sure that the quality is good. Nobody likes to mention the word risk, apparently. But I do, because I think that we can create a risk insurance. And how do we do that? Well, we create risk profiles. And risk profiles work the same way as natural insurance does. We just look at what would cost us the most. What is the highest probability of happening, and how much would it cost us if it happened? And now it's tough to go down the list of all these, because there's a lot of different risks that we could talk about. But I think that testers, just by doing their work, just by doing a test report, could add a risk profile to various categories. For our purposes, we're going to take performance, we're going to take functionality and security, and then we'll do another category that says other. Conceptually, that's the argument. Now in practice, let's see how this works. It's the same practices as previous scenarios. Nothing's going to change, no bugs are going to shift. We're just talking about adding risk profile insurances. We create them based on the item and the probability. Performance problems are big right now because we're in the middle of a pandemic, we need things to be up and running. it's very expensive for us if we can't keep that up and running. So we're going to estimate that at about €1,000 cost if we have a performance issue. I don't think we're capable of doing a whole lot to cover performance issues, especially with unexpected things like the traffic from a pandemic or just things that we haven't found in our regular testing. So I think we can cover maybe 10% of that by using our risk profiles, by saying, keep your eye on this performance. If you see it start to go down, let's switch, let's do something about it. 10%. Functionality, on the other hand, well, we know what it's supposed to do. We can see when it's not doing what it's supposed to do. Costs us about $5,000, and we got about a 50% chance of guessing correctly that it's going to be this kind of an issue versus that kind of an issue. So a little bit less, but a good coverage, good risk coverage on that. Security problems. Now, I don't know if any of you have been following the news lately, but security problems have been a huge issue, especially for software companies, especially for social media companies. And that's incredibly expensive if it goes wrong, because a lot of these companies work with data. I know almost every company I've worked for uses a lot of data, and that data needs to be protected. When it's not protected, it costs us a lot of money, let's say €250,000 per issue. The sad news is, no matter how much we do in terms of a risk profile to say, hey, there's a lot of data, it's risky, it doesn't mean that our coverage is going to do a whole lot to prevent it. Sad news is, the more things we build, the more hackers figure out how to build, and it just goes on and on and on. So add that to the fact that there's not a lot of security testers to be found in most companies, I would say that we can cover that with about 5% probability. Not great, but still quite a lot of money to be covered just in case. And other problems, let's say they're going to be a little bit more than functional, so 10,000, and we can cover those at 10% because they widely differ depending on what we're talking about. So if we do the math on all these, we multiply the risk value by the percent chance that we can cover it with insurance, with knowing about it, by doing our tests, and we're looking at about 26,000 in savings just by these risk profiles. Again, we're helping support, we're helping our planning, our project management. We're basically saying this is what we want to keep an eye on. And by doing so, we manage to lower the chances of it happening unexpectedly. We're able to react to it, we have some contingencies, and we end up with a monetary result of a cost reduction of 80% of cost of quality. Again, these are things that we're adding. This is not something as part of the built product. We're adding a risk insurance to it. Still have the same amount of defects, stays at 83% less. I still think that's a pretty good number. And the return on investment now goes up to 2,185%. Pretty good. But we touched on something here. Well, I touched on something here just very shortly, and I said project management, that we're reducing risk for project management. But one of the biggest risks for project management is that the project fails. So I think we can add some value to that. Let's talk about product and project reliability testing. We want to make sure that what's being built and what's being designed is going to do what we want it to do. We want to make sure that the project goes on. We want to make sure that our application is correct. We want to make sure that what the client requested is what we're building. And the more we can measure this, the more we can control it. You can't actually control anything that you don't measure because you don't know what it is you're doing. You can try, and you might, by pure chance, fix it. But if you haven't measured it, you won't know whether you fixed it. So again, we're not talking about adding a different part of testing. We're not talking about adding a new investment in it. What we're talking about is, as testers, while we test, we measure, and we measure well. Unfortunately for what I just said, that doesn't mean that we don't need to invest in those measurements. Now, we do the same practices as in the previous scenarios, and we need some metrics. Originally, when I made this presentation, I had done some calculations on how much money it would take for training, for personnel, for the kind of design that you had to do to build up all these different measurements. And it came out to a good 26,000 in terms of investment. And that was not great. I mean, yeah, we've been saving them a lot of money, but practically just erases everything we just covered with the risk insurance. Then I went online, I did a little bit of research, and I found out that there's tools that measure all of the things that I would need. And I'm talking about things like failure metrics, what's open, what's closed, what's the status, resolution time, causes, source, location, all that fun stuff. Test case metrics, passed, failed, not performed, blocked, coverage metrics with our risks, our regulations, our restrictions, our codes, what progress has been made, test progress, budget, consumption, all these great measurements. So we got all these measurements that I wanted. And these tools have them. They already exist. And they cost me 34 euros a month. So my 26,000 figure was way out. So instead I took the 34 a month. I just added 34 to our investment. Now the great thing here is, based on research, having these metrics in place and testing for these metrics while we do our normal testing, just basically add them to operations or add them to our own stream, it doesn't matter. While we have that in place, we can, for small projects, cover about 2% reduction in failure to 87% for huge projects. That's a large figure. It's harder to believe, so we're going to lower that to an averaging of about 10% per project. So if we can do even a 10% reduction in a project failing, we save 11,000 euros. Again, projects cost a lot of money. We're talking about the personnel, we're talking about the infrastructure, not just for the tester this time, but now also the developer. When you run the math, we save about 11,000. So now we have a cost reduction of 81%. We had to pay a little bit more, we got a little bit more. Same number of defects on the customer side, and our return on investment is now 2,222%. I think that's a good figure to stop at, honestly. I think we can come up with these things all we like, slightly increase it a little bit more, but this is how we reduce the cost of quality. We add reliability, we add insurance, and we reduce the cost of quality on everything else. But I don't think, again, that that's the only value that testing has. So I want to talk to you about one more thing that is far too often skipped, in my opinion. And that is the fact that we innovate. I know, everybody says testers don't build things, but honestly, if you are not aware of a system, if you're not aware of their potential and their capabilities and what it can do and what it can't do, then most of it isn't going to make a whole lot of sense when you design a new product, because you're going to have the same problems. But if we encounter a problem and we think, hey, maybe if we build it this way, then we won't have that problem. Or maybe we can use that problem to design something new. So in this form of testing, which I call innovation testing, our observations lead to innovation. Let me give you some examples. Some of the most famous inventions that are in our industry. Post-it notes. I've got a whole bunch of them right here in my office. Post-it notes was a failure as a product. It was supposed to be glue, and it was terrible glue. It didn't stick for very long, and it didn't stick very well. However, his colleagues tested these Post-it notes by putting them up on his office, and now we have a product that is worth far more than what they were originally trying to design. That's an innovation that came from testing and an innovation that came from failure. Penicillin was created because of poor test conditions, because he left it out too long. Sucralose, fake sugar, that was created because somebody decided to taste the coal tar that they were using for medical purposes. Don't ask me why they were tasting it. I really hope it was accidental. But again, just by testing things and thinking about it and saying, this is really sweet stuff. What else could it be used for? We've created a whole new product line that, again, nobody uses coal tar really for medical purposes anymore, but sucralose is in far too many things. Sorry to tell you, people who like your diet drinks, you're drinking tar. Not so much fun. But when you do this, with all the money that you saved the organization before, maybe you can convince them just to let you have an hour or 4 during the week, just where you can do innovation. You can look at everything you've learned from your testing, you talk with the team, and you come up with ideas for how to make a better product or a new product or something innovative. And that all comes from testing. That's the test perspective. So, how do we add value? Well, we manually find bugs that would otherwise bother users. We create automation, which finds systemic bugs faster and more effectively. We do testing of requests, requirements, and design, and that prevents the flaws from entering the process in the first place. We give information about the product, the process, and any other potential bugs. We project risks and we insure them. We build in protections for if something goes wrong. We make tests and test reports reliable and relatable so that projects don't fail, so that project steering is easier, and frankly, so that we can control it a bit more. And we generate ideas for innovation and improvement. All of these things are areas where we add value just by doing our testing. But that requires investment. This doesn't come from nothing. And if you want to really get the most out of all of the values that I pointed above, we need to work on some things. We need to work on our skills. We need to invest in courses, workshops, conferences like this, test events. We need to get those skills up. Then we need to work on automation. If we really want good automation, we need to have good tooling. We need to have good tooling interest groups in the organization. We need to have training again. And you need to give people the time and frankly the pay to go to these demos that these vendors do and figure out which tool is best. We need to invest in static testing. We need to invest in agile training for our testers, for our organization, frankly. We need to invest in the refinement and design process. Get yourself a good design specialist, get a design tester, or just train somebody in it. But focus on that design. Get a good investment in it, otherwise you're not going to get as much value out of there as we posited just back then. Awareness. Run communication workshops, do demos, show off what it is that we found in testing, find a cool bug and tell everybody about it, not just other testers, but do demos, do info evenings for vendors, from vendors to other organizations. Share this stuff. Risk. Please, please, please get your managers to do a risk management course. Give them one yourself if you have to. Tell them that there's more ways to prevent risk than just prevent. You can also do mitigation, you can do reduction, you can do contingencies, you can accept that it's going to happen. There's a ton of ways to handle risk. It's not just about prevention, and if they understand that, they'll understand us better. And if you understand that as a tester, you can start making risk-based testing templates. You can look at those risks, you can act on those risks before it's even built, and again, you help design. These are all the things you can do. You can do risk storming workshops. It's a great way to understand how to do it. Then we go to alignment. You want to invest in alignment. You want unified testing approaches. If one part of your company is testing one way and one is testing another, you're going to argue about the result. And you're probably not going to understand each other's results. Get that stuff unified. Get a test guild. Invest in one. Invest in getting people together and talking about how they do things, how they design things. And lastly, work on those fundamentals. If you don't have good test data, and if you don't have a good test environment, half the stuff that you test you can't trust, because your data is going to be wrong, your environment's going to be throwing false errors out there, and that is the most frustrating thing I encounter as a tester. Usually I ask everybody in the hall to raise your hand if this is as frustrating for you. If you want to raise your hand at home, please do so. But seriously, if you don't have those fundamentals, half the value that I pointed out is just a wash, because we're going to have to redo our tests over and over and over to make sure that that's the right thing. Invest in those fundamentals. Get your test data right. Get your test environment right. Trust it. Know that it works. And yeah, that costs money and it costs time. But you get results. You get results from all of these investments. You get payouts. When we improve these areas, we see direct results, such as fewer testing cycles and faster testing cycle times. You get less production issues. Earlier uptake of items from the backlog, you get better reliability, more cross-domain team support, again, new innovations, and above all, you get happier testers. This in turn gives you new and improved resources to add even more value. What does that mean? Well, we have to measure that. We have to show that, what I said back there, that we have more results, we have to show those results. How do we measure those results? Well, Measure your team cycle times. Measure your production issues that you've logged. Measure the ratio of bugs that you find in development versus that you find in production. And please, I'm going to double down on this. Note I said ratio. If you find more bugs and you show that to your manager, they might be impressed. But you know just as well as I know that that's not any sign of quality. It just means you found more bugs. Great. If you really want to show whether you improve things with any of these values, you've got to show that you have less bugs in production and more bugs in development. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but if you say, yeah, we found a whole lot more bugs in development, that's good news because it means you're not finding them in production. Measure both, compare the ratio, and show the ratio. That's how you measure that. You want to take a look at things like how much they're completed, whether there's additional investments in the development cycle, the team reports, that the clarity of the request is improved, and yeah, ask the testers, are you happier? Is this working for you? Have the fundamentals improved to the point where you're not finding so many false positives? Try to find a measure for each of these value items, and I've given you a few here, there's plenty more. Because when you do, you need to be able to translate that from test value to business value. Again, we talk a lot about how this would be good for the team, how this would be good for testers, but when it comes right down to it, we need to ask ourselves, what is the business value? Well, they probably value faster time to market. They probably value that you're saving a lot of money on those production issues. You can show that chart to them. You can tell them that you have better customer trust because of this. You can tell them that you've got new innovative projects to sell or to simply use within the company. You can tell them that they have saved money and made innovations and got a faster time to market with your alignment or with your fundamentals. Every time you talk about what you've done as a test value, try to link it to something that you know they've been requesting. And these are generic business values. You can usually tell what your business side wants based on the request they ask. We want our customer to have better access to X. Okay, so show them how your testing showed that they now have better access to it, or how the way that you tested ensured that they have better access with less of a risk that it fails, or that the performance is better. Any kind of way you can link it back to their original request, their direct request, that's showing real business value. So I hope that's pretty clear now to you where our value lies in and what we can produce, and what we can measure, and what we can show to different people. Take this after the conference, take this to your manager, show it to people, who knows? You might just convince them to go to even more conferences where you can learn even more things and boost more skills and boost your awareness. But I promise you a glimpse into the future too, not just for the business side, but also for yourself. And that's why I want to talk a little bit right before we end here about your role as a test specialist. Because I think we have an opportunity to grow even more in our value than just our basic testing. And yeah, I want all of this to become basic testing. So how do we add more value to the organization as test specialists while growing in our specialization? Well, I mentioned before that I'm a test pathfinder, but not all of you will be familiar with that term, so let me lay it out there. A test pathfinder is somebody who basically goes through the testing world. What is it people do? What are people excited about? How are we being perceived? And what kind of tools are there in the industry? And throws it all together to pick a good path that leads to people's organizational goals. A lot of buzzwords. In essence, my goal is to improve the quality of a process or product. A Pathfinder would empower others in their quality awareness and responsibility. They would monitor and improve communications across the organization to increase the awareness again and the alignment, coordinate effort. They do a lot of measuring. You measure test maturity and engage initiatives to help people grow. And you design frameworks for better testing and better automation. And a whole lot more. Primarily, a test pathfinder explores the past, the present, and the future of testing, and it helps companies align towards that using their goals and using what their stated goals are. So if you're wondering what a future as a pathfinder might look like for you, it's handy once more to look at the value added by one. We can work backwards from that value and we can look at the activities you might find yourself engaged in. Like, for example, as a test pathfinder, you would be coaching essential skills for testing. You would be designing frameworks for testing and for automation. You would expand the scope of testing. You could support and influence the knowledge sharing on all levels, not just testing, but also the organization, the management, development, anyone else. Anybody interested in quality. You can increase the awareness of risk and risk management. You can give those courses to the managers. You can align teams for reliable results and reliable criteria that everybody uses. And finally, Pathfinders can improve testing by co-creating and testing, supporting and maintaining the foundations of testing that I keep saying are so incredibly vital in order to make this work. Now, you may notice how all of these link directly back to the skills, automation, static testing, awareness, risk alignment, and fundamentals that I mentioned were investments for testing, and that's no coincidence. Because as a Pathfinder, your primary role is to support and enhance the testing process, which means supporting and enhancing the people who do it. As a test Pathfinder, if you're interested in doing this, if you're interested in introducing this into your company, I want you to keep in mind that your top priority isn't just finding the path, isn't just going out there and being like, this is everything I know about testing, but it's guiding people along the way. It's helping the people who want to get there. And you do that sometimes by guiding them in person, sometimes you leave stones along the way, whatever it takes to help boost them to where they want to go. And you can boost on every single one of those things where they add value, where you've proven they can add value, and where your company understands that testers add value. To sum up, testing value is far more than just finding bugs. If you take nothing else out of this talk, remember, it is far more than just finding bugs, and we need people to understand that. When as a company you invest in better testing, you not only get much larger return, but you get better testers. People are excited to come work for a company that really invests in what they do, in what they love, and what they're passionate about. When you invest in testing, and when you invest in the testing fundamentals, you're going to see returns like I showed you above. And if you don't, nothing will return much. It simply is going to block every step of the way. You are losing money right now. You can stop losing money by investing. It's a weird concept. Anybody with a business degree will say, yeah, that's fine. Most of us, we don't think that way. Start thinking that way. Invest and you'll get something out of it. And if you're interested in becoming more than just your test specialist, if you want to help your organization in another way, think about setting up a pathfinding system. Think about becoming a test pathfinder. Think about how you can help the organization larger than just your role in the team as a tester. Remember, it works on all 7 levels of the values in testing, and remember that you can contribute to boosting everybody else. It's about empowerment. It's about getting everybody across the finish line. Because in my view, that's the only way that we're going to move our value beyond the bugs. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this talk. Again, all of my slides will be available for you to use, share, and show. If you have any questions, I think we have a little question and answer session after this, but I'm going to hand everything now over to our openers. Thank you again.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for watching my presentation just now. I have decided to take a little seat here and answer a couple of your questions while we still have a few minutes. I got a lot of good questions coming in about the theory behind a lot of the calculations that I did. First one that I saw was, are the numbers for pricing 1, 10, 100, 1000, and the percentages of bugs found based on statistics or on assumptions? I did a lot of research for myself, but I also did some statistical research based off of the work other people did in around 2014, 2015 to get those numbers. The 1, 10, 100, 1000 model is based off of the Total Quality Management book and a couple of researchers in the Standish Group and other companies like that. They might all be using their same research together, but it's one that has stood the test of time to be that's where the quality value is. As far as the number of bugs, that was also based on the similar research, also taken out of Total Quality Management, but also done by a study from Quality Minds, which is a German company. And there they found that, developers typically are able to find the 250 bugs, and testers, just by doing manual testing, are able to find about 300 bugs. An important part of that, because there was a question about personnel, let's say 5,000 euros is the monthly salary of one tester. It's not realistic that one person would manually find 475 bugs in a month. I agree just on that question, because manually you only find about 300. And the reason why it seems like such a high number is that a lot of times when we find one bug, we're actually finding a lot more than that. We're covering a lot more of the bugs just by finding a single source of that bug. So when you cover one obvious bug, a lot of times you'll cover 10 to 15 non-obvious ones, or ones that have an after effect in the system. especially if you're talking about an input system. If you cover a good filter, then you prevent a whole lot of the other bugs that would have been in the system if you hadn't tested for it. So a lot of the times when you log bugs, you're not going to find 300 logged bugs, but you will in essence be preventing 300 things from being found by customers at different parts of the system. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, that these numbers are going to reflect slightly differently when you log. That's why I say the important thing is to look at the ratio. Look at how many issues that the customers have versus the increase of bugs that you find if you want to do the numerical argument like that. I don't think it's the strongest argument. I'd go with one of the other ones. One of the other questions has just disappeared. Well, another question on here was, the main benefit of automation is not finding bugs but saving time. How would we put financial value on being able to release stuff to market quicker? Hopefully I covered that near the end about how you tie the value of the time you save to faster time to market. I agree. When you talk about automation, I think we as testers conceptually should talk about it as saving time for us so that we can do better testing, so that we can do more design testing, more exploring, more risk profiles. And that's really why I also reduce the number of bugs that we find when we do automation, because we're not going to find those easy bugs anymore. We're going to really be exploring and doing the real work, in my opinion, that testers are supposed to, instead of just finding things that are a verification. That's why I use the term automated verification. So yes, please do see it around there. Please do see it like saving you time to go do other things. And if you want to make the monetary argument, show how it can find more bugs in total so that you can do that calculation with the 110, 100,000. Last question I'm going to answer here, because we've got to move on to the next presentation, is can we have a copy of his slides? Absolutely, please. Take my slides, copy them, show them, do the calculations for yourself. I've got notes on each one of the slides on there. You can use that as a pitch. I did make this specifically because I was motivated to get everybody to tell what the value of testing was to their organization, to the managers. So please, by all means, share this. I will, if you don't see a link from the organizers on the slides, you can send me an email or a LinkedIn, and I will get those slides to you directly. After that, I'm going to hop over to the Ask Me Anything corner. I see another question just came in. I'll answer that over there if you really want an answer to that one right away. I'm heading there right now. I hope you have a great time with the rest of the conference, and thank you very much.